السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
الله أكبر الله أكبر
الله أكبر
الله أكبر الله أكبر
الله أكبر.
أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله
أشهد أن لا إله
أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله
أشهد أن لا إله
أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله
أشهد أن
أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله
أشهد أن سيدنا محمد رسول
حي على الصلاة
لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله.
حي على الصلاة
لا حول ولا
حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح
لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله.
الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله
إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا. من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلله فلا هادي له، وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، وأشهد أن سيدنا محمدا عبده ورسوله. يقول الله جل وعلا في كتابه الكريم: يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وقولوا قولا سديدا يصلح لكم أعمالكم ويغفر لكم ذنوبكم، ومن يطع الله ورسوله فقد فاز فوزا عظيما. أما بعد، فإن أصدق الحديث كتاب الله، وخير الهدي هدي سيدنا محمد صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم، وشر الأمور محدثاتها، وكل محدثة بدعة، وكل بدعة ضلالة، وكل ضلالة في النار. أعاذنا الله وإياكم منها أجمعين. أما بعد. Dear brothers and sisters, the great Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah ta'ala famously said, التراجم سيف من سيوف الله عز وجل. He said that biographies are a sword from the swords of God. The biographies, the stories, the life stories of those illustrious individuals in our history are like a sword from the swords of God. And why are they swords? They are swords because they cut through pretension and they show us ideals as lived expressions. And this is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has mentioned stories in the Quran so frequently. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions about the stories of the previous prophets. لَقَدْ كَانَ فِي قَصَصِهِمْ عِبْرَةٌ لِأُولِي الْأَلْبَابِ. Indeed, in their narratives, their stories, are lessons for those of intelligence, those with penetrating insight and depth. And today, inshaAllah ta'ala, we want to tell a story from our Islamic history, where we find enduring lessons on morality, on living one's principles of bravery and speaking truth to power. And this is the story of the pious scholar and the student of the companion Abdullah ibn Abbas, the great tabi'i from the second generation known as Saeed ibn Jubayr, rahimahullah ta'ala. The story of Saeed ibn Jubayr and his dialogue with the tyrant al-Hajjaj ibn Yusuf al-Thaqafi. Now, this story is a story that has enduring lessons for every single person if they pay attention to the dialogue and use their intelligence, their intellect, to extract the greater lessons. In those troubled times where this dialogue took place, some people made the ultimate sacrifice in the face of bloodthirsty tyranny. And to understand this sacrifice and the stance of Saeed ibn Jubayr, we have to speak a bit about him and we have to speak a bit about Hajjaj ibn Yusuf. Who is Saeed ibn Jubayr, rahimahullah ta'ala? First of all, his name is quite amazing. Saeed ibn Jubayr, when translated into English, literally means the happy one, the son of the small one who repairs, who fixes things. Saeed ibn Jubayr was born during the caliphate of Imam Hassan ibn Ali, and he was originally from Habasha. He was originally from Abyssinia, and he lived in Iraq as a slave, but eventually he was able to win his freedom. He went on to study with the companion Ibn Abbas radiyallahu anhuma, and he studied with Imam Zayn al-Abidin Ali ibn al-Hussein, the son of Imam Hussein, and he was known for his piety and his devotion, and he was known to do a khatam of the Quran every 2 days and pray every single night. And he would go on to be one of the most prolific scholars in the interpretation of Quran, the science of tafsir. He became one of the leading scholars of hadith in his time. And some of the ulama, the scholars, considered him to be so firm in his knowledge, so exacting, so reliable, that mursal narrations, meaning narrations where a tabi'i from the second generation relates from the Prophet ﷺ directly without a sahabi in between, they considered his marasil to be accepted even in matters of law, because he was so reliable. Never would he transmit something from the Prophet ﷺ except that it was sound. Such was his exactitude and his precision and his taqwa. As the student of Ibn Abbas, Saeed ibn Jubayr, literally the happy one, the son of the small one who repairs, he lived in very troubled times. He lived in a time of tyranny, a time that was spoken about by the Prophet ﷺ himself, when he prophesied what would happen in his ummah and the order of rule, speaking about the tyrannical rulers that would arise after him. And he endured the tyranny and oppression of Hajjaj ibn Yusuf al-Thaqafi and those before him. Who is Hajjaj? Hajjaj was born in the year 40 after the hijrah of the Prophet ﷺ. He was not a Sahabi, he was not a companion, but his grandfather was the first convert to Islam in the city of Ta'if, the ambassador who worked on behalf of Quraysh that we know as As-Sahabi al-Jalil, Urwa ibn Mas'ud radiyallahu anhu. His grandfather was a Sahabi, and his father was a teacher of the Quran. And Hajjaj ibn Yusuf grew up in an environment of great service to the Quran. And it is recorded in his biography that Hajjaj ibn Yusuf himself had a great love for the Quran. But as Imam al-Dhahabi mentions in his biography of Hajjaj ibn Yusuf, after mentioning his love and service to the Quran, he said, none of that can wash away the innocent blood that he shed. It is said that Hajjaj ibn Yusuf was the first person to institute putting the diacritical dots, the nuqat, and the vowel marks, the harakat, on the mushaf. So when you open the mushaf today and you see the diacritical dots and the harakat that make it easier to read, that was instituted by Hajjaj ibn Yusuf. But that does not erase his tyranny. That does not wash away his oppression. For indeed, the Prophet ﷺ said in a hadith that we should all know very well, إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَيُؤَيِّدُ هَذَا الدِّينَ بِرَجُلٍ فَاجِرٍ وَمَنْ لَا خَلَاقَ لَهُ. Indeed, Allah will give victory, aid to this religion by a corrupt individual and one who has no share of the hereafter. It is possible for a tyrant to be a tyrant, yet in other areas of his life he may do things that contribute to elevating Islam. That does not wash away the tyranny. And in his younger years, Hajjaj ibn Yusuf went to Damascus in pursuit of fortune. And once he was there, he became a shurti. What is a shurti? In modern Arabic, a shurti is a police officer. But in that time, it is not what we tend to think of when we hear police officer. The shurti in that time was basically what we would call a government thug. And the shurti was not an honorable position to hold. Whatever the government wants, the shurti carries it out with force. The shurti is nothing more than a henchman for the government. So he became a shurti in Damascus, and with his ruthlessness and brutality, he was able to rise through the ranks. If anyone disobeyed his commands, he would execute harsh punishments. And that is because for him, ad-dima, blood, was a very trifling thing. It meant very little to him. He would shed blood for any possible reason. This was his reputation as literally a murderer for the government. And for his brutality and ruthlessness, his reputation began to grow, and he rose through the ranks. And eventually the caliph of the time, Abdul Malik ibn Marwan, appointed him as the chief of the shurta, the chief of the internal police force. No different from what we today call in the Arab world the mukhabarat and amn al-dawla, the shabiha, these types of thugs and henchmen that work for the internal police forces to tyrannize the population. He became the chief of those people because of his brutality. And Hajjaj wanted to prove his loyalty, and he proved that loyalty with bloodshed and with brutality. Al-Imam Ibn Kathir mentions about him in his Al-Bidayah wal-Nihaya, قد كان ناصبيا يبغض عليا وشيعته في هواء آل مروان بني أمية وكان جبارا عنيدا مقداما على سفك الدماء بأدنى شبهة. he was a person who had animosity for Imam Ali and his supporters, so as to appease the family of Marwan. He was a stubborn tyrant, he said, always ready to shed innocent blood for the slightest justification, the slightest reason. And Imam al-Dhahabi, rahimahullah, says about Hajjaj ibn Yusuf, وَكَانَ ظَلُومًا جَبَّارًا نَاصِبِيًّا خَبِيثًا سَفَّاكًا لِلدِّمَاءِ وقد كان ذا شجاعة وإقدام ومكر ودهاء وفصاحة وبلاغة وتعظيم للقرآن وله حسنات مغمورة في بحر ذنوبه وأمره إلى الله. Imam al-Dhahabi says about Hajjaj, he was an oppressor, a tyrant, an animosity to the family of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and was a vile shedder of blood. And he was also very intelligent. He was also eloquent. And he revered the Quran. He has good deeds engulfed in the ocean of his sins. وَأَمْرُهُ إِلَى اللَّهِ. His matter is with Allah. Allah will judge him. It is narrated in Sahih Muslim from Asma bint Abi Bakr, the daughter of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, that she once spoke in the presence of Hajjaj, decrying his tyranny and oppression. She said to him in his face, the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam told us that among Thaqif, the people of Ta'if, there would be a liar to appear and a shedder of blood. As for the liar, we have already seen him. And she's referring to an individual in history in that time known as Mukhtar al-Thaqafi, who was a cult leader at the opposite extreme of Hajjaj. That's the liar. And she said, as for the shedder of blood, I do not think except that you are him. You are him. So according to Asma bint Abi Bakr, the Prophet ﷺ prophesied the emergence of an oppressor, of a tyrant, a shedder of blood, and she believed that Hajjaj was that individual. Hajjaj was an absolute disaster. After the surviving Sahaba and their children began to complain of his high-handedness and tyranny, eventually the Caliph Abdul Malik ibn Marwan decided to withdraw him from his post as chief of the internal police. And he sent him to a new post. He sent him to Iraq. So now in Iraq he has relative autonomy. And he's there in Iraq as a mini king, ruling it and only reporting to Abdul Malik ibn Marwan. Abu Dawood rahimahullah narrates in his Sunan a narration that describes a speech that he gave when he came to the masjid. In that speech, he goes into the masjid, he calls the people forward, and he says to them, this tyrant says, "A famous man I am. My deeds increase my praise. If I lay my turban by, well, you will recognize my face. Take a look at me. I see straining eyes and outstretched necks, heads ready, ripe unto the harvest. I am a master at that trade. I am a master of that trade. Already I think I see the glitter of blood between those turbans and those beards of yours." This is how he speaks to the subjects. The Khalifa, Abdul Malik ibn Marwan, has emptied his quiver out and has found in me his cruelest arrow of sharpest steel, of toughest wood. You people are all traitors, vile of heart. I am Hajjaj ibn Yusuf, a man, I promise you, who makes no threat except that he carries it out, who makes no cut except that I flay. Woe to the man I get my hands on. Walk straight ahead. Turn neither right nor left. Follow your officers. Take the oath of loyalty and cringe. This is how he spoke. A dictator, a tyrant, an oppressor. And that's exactly what he did. He did exactly as he said in that speech. He got Iraq under his political control through sheer brutality. But in that his lifetime, as the oppression increased more and more, he faced a revolt. This was a revolt by an individual known as Ibn al-Ash'ath, who was a leader in his army who saw that this is too much. And so he left the army and organized a revolt. And he got behind him, he got support from 300 of the Qurra, of the ulama, from the scholars of Basra, and support from the companion Anas ibn Malik radiyallahu anhu, who was 95 years when this happened. They all supported his revolt. Enough was enough. And Saeed ibn Jubayr was among those 300 who supported this revolt. This was the first time that many scholars, including the student of Ibn Abbas, joined in revolt to take a stand against tyranny because it was too much. But history records that they were unsuccessful. They were massacred. And this, dear brothers and sisters, is a very dark period in our history. But we should not pretend that history doesn't exist. It is there to teach us a lesson, to provide us guidance on how to be and how not to be. The intelligent person learns from history and derives lessons on how to be and how not to be. So Saeed ibn Jubayr rahimahullah was among those 10,000 plus free people who launched a rebellion against this dictator Hajjaj ibn Yusuf. But as we said, it was unsuccessful. Hajjaj put it down with brutality, and Saeed ibn Jubayr was forced to retreat and go in hiding. He was in exile, hiding from Hajjaj and his forces for 8 years. But 8 years later, after the revolt, the army of Hajjaj discovered the whereabouts of Saeed ibn Jubayr, and they detained him and brought him to the court of Hajjaj. So now he's brought before Hajjaj. What is he going to say? What will Hajjaj say to him? And what will he say in reply? We shall see. Dear brothers and sisters, as we mentioned in the beginning of this khutbah, Imam Abu Hanifa famously said, "At-tarajim sayfun min suyufillahi azza wa jal." The biographies are a sword from the swords of God. They are a sword because they cut through pretension and they show us ideals, not as just ideals, but as lived expressions. In times of fitna, of tribulation and strife, in times of oppression, we do have examples in our history who taught us not just with their statements, not just with their words, but their actions and their mawaqif, their stances, recording for all time what it means to be steadfast in the deen. What does it look like to have fortitude and firmness in one's faith? What does it look like to stand up for truth and confront falsehood? May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us of those who are attentive to these lessons and enable us to draw beneficial lessons from history that teach us how to be and how to respond to trials and tribulations. Ameen. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Allahumma salli wa sallim wa barik. Allahumma salli wa sallim wa barik. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. حمدا يوافي نعمه ويكافئ مزيده. اللهم لك الحمد كما ينبغي لجلال وجهك ولعظيم سلطانك. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد المبعوث رحمة للعالمين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. أما بعد. Dear brothers and sisters, Saeed ibn Jubayr rahimahullah has now been captured. After 8 years on the run, 8 years in exile, he has now been captured and brought before Hajjaj ibn Yusuf in his court. And here we have the hiwar, the dialogue, what some scholars and historians have called the munadara, the debate between Hajjaj ibn Yusuf and Saeed ibn Jubayr. This is mentioned in numerous historical works where they have this discussion. Pay very close attention to the dialogue between these two people. Hajjaj sees Saeed ibn Jubayr for the first time and he asks him, "What is your name?" Saeed ibn Jubayr says, "My name is Saeed ibn Jubayr." And Hajjaj says to him, "No, rather you are Shaqi ibn Qusayr." Remember we said that Saeed ibn Jubayr literally means the happy one, the son of the small one who repairs. And Hajjaj reversed the meaning and said, "No, your name is Shaqi ibn Qusayr," because Shaqi means the miserable one, the one who's unhappy, the son of the broken one. So he is now engaging in what Allah has forbidden, at-tanabuz bil-alqab, giving bad nicknames to people. Saeed bin Jubayr says, "Rather, my mother knows my name better than you do." Hajjaj says, "You are shaqi, and so is your mother. You are wretched, and so is your mother." Saeed says, "As for the unseen, one besides you knows it truly," meaning Allah Ta'ala. Only Allah knows who is truly shaqi. Hajjaj says, "I will cause you to change in this world with a blazing fire. I'm going to punish you." Saeed bin Jubayr says, "Had I known that was in your hands, I would have taken you as a god." Hajjaj says, "What do you say about Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam? What do you say about Muhammad?" Saeed bin Jubayr says, "Huwa Nabiyyur Rahma wa Imamul Huda." He is the Prophet of mercy and the leader of guidance, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Hajjaj bin Yusuf says, "And what do you say about Ali ibn Abi Talib?" Remember, there's animosity he has. And so Saeed bin Jubayr says, is Ali ibn Abi Talib in paradise or in hell? And Saeed bin Jubayr says, had I entered Jannah, I would have seen its inhabitants. He's not speaking of the unseen. So then Hajjaj says to him, "What do you say about the rulers? What do you say about the hukam, the umara?" He says, "Lastu alayhim biwakil." Saeed bin Jubayr says, "I am not a guarantor for them. I can't guarantee anything for them. Their affair is with Allah." Hajjaj bin Yusuf says, "Who among the leaders do you like the best?" And Saeed bin Jubayr says, "Ardahum li rabbihim." Of those I like the best, of the rulers, those whom my Creator is most pleased with, those are the ones. And Hajjaj says, "And who then is Allah most pleased with among these rulers?" And Saeed bin Jubayr says, "The knowledge of that is with the one who knows their secrets and their private discourses." Al-ilmu inda Allah. Hajjaj is getting frustrated. He says, "Forget about all this. Tell me, why don't you ever laugh?" Saeed bin Jubayr said, "I've never seen anything that should make me laugh. And how can a created being laugh when he was created from clay, which is consumed by the fire?" Hajjaj says, "Then why is it that we laugh?" Saeed bin Jubayr said, "The hearts of the people are not at the same level." Now at this stage, this is the preliminary discourse. After this, Hajjaj bin Yusuf tells some of his henchmen to go gather some gold and silver and precious jewels, and they bring it in front of Saeed bin Jubayr. And Saeed bin Jubayr says to him, "If you use what you have gathered to purchase safety from the greatest terror on the Day of Judgment, then that is fine. Otherwise, Allah says, يَوْمَ تَرَوْنَهَا تَذْهَلُ كُلُّ مُرْضِعَةٍ عَمَّا أَرْضَعَتْ وَتَضَعَ كُلُّ ذَاتِ حَمْلٍ حَمْلَهَا." On that day, every nursing mother will forget her nursing, and every pregnant one will drop her load. Nothing that is gathered for the world is good other than that which is good and purified, what is halal. Hajjaj then told one of his henchmen to bring a flute, and a lute. And when they were brought, someone began to play the lute and the flute. And when Saeed ibn Jubayr heard this, he began to cry. Hajjaj bin Yusuf was puzzled, and he asked Saeed ibn Jubayr, "Why are you crying? Is it due to playing instruments?" And Saeed bin Jubayr says, "No, it is sadness. As for this flute, it reminded me of the day of judgment, when the horn will be blown. وَنُفِخَ فِي الصُّورِ." The flute sound triggered a memory, a reminder of the blowing of the trumpet on the day of judgment. And that is what caused him to cry. He said, "As for the lute, it is a tree which has been wrongfully cut for it to be made. And as for the strings, they're from the boughs of sheep, and they will be resurrected with you on the day of judgment." Hajjaj is getting a little angry now. He says, "Woe unto you!" Saeed bin Jubayr says, "The destruction that you have invoked upon me is reserved for those who are sent away from Jannah and are made to enter hellfire. That's not for you to declare." And then Hajjaj is now ready to finish him off. And he tells Saeed bin Jubayr, "Choose the method that I will use to kill you. Now is the time." Hajjaj ibn Yusuf says, "Choose the way you want to die." And Saeed bin Jubayr says to him, "Choose for yourself, Ya Hajjaj, for wallahi, by Allah, whatever method you use to kill me, Allah will kill you in the same manner in the hereafter." Now Hajjaj says to him, "Do you want me to forgive you? Do you want me to pardon you?" And Saeed bin Jubayr replies, "If there is any forgiveness, it's from Allah. As for you, you have no exoneration and you have no excuse for what you do." At this point, Hajjaj is done. He tells the guards, "Take him away." And as Saeed bin Jubayr was being taken away, Saeed began to laugh. He was just crying a moment ago. Now he's laughing. And Hajjaj is told that he's over there laughing. And he tells them to bring him back again. And when he is brought back, Hajjaj says to Saeed bin Jubayr, "What is causing you to laugh now?" And Saeed ibn Jubayr says his famous statement. He says, "عجبت من جرأتك على الله وحلم الله عنك." I am laughing because I became amazed at your boldness and brazenness in your dealings with Allah, which is contrasted with Allah's lenience towards you. It's amazing, isn't it? Tyrants act so haughtily and arrogantly like they control everything. And look at how Allah gives them time to change, but rarely do they ever change. That's what he was laughing about. And so at this point, Hajjaj is done. He tells the guards to bring a special kind of carpet that is made of leather. And they would place this carpet and roll it out on special occasions when they wanted to kill someone and not have the blood get on the marble floors. So they brought this leather mat out. And as the mat was laid out, Saeed bin Jubayr was put on the carpet, and Hajjaj said to the guards, "Uqtuluhu, kill him, get rid of him." But before they were able to kill him, Saeed bin Jubayr made a request. He says, "Please, before you do that, allow me to pray 2 rak'ahs. So he gets ready to perform the 2 rak'ahs, and he faces the Qibla. And as he's facing the Qibla, Hajjaj bin Yusuf wants to humiliate him, and he tells the guards, "Turn his face away from the Qibla." And so they turn it away from the Qibla. And when they do that, Saeed bin Jubayr recites a verse of the Quran. He recites, "Inni wajjahtu wajhiya lilladhi fatara as-samawati wal-arda hanifa wama ana min al-mushrikeen." Indeed, I have turned my face towards the one who created the heavens and the earth, inclining towards truth, and I am not of those who associate others with Allah. They turn the face, and he recites, فَأَيْنَمَا تُوَلُّوا فَثَمَّ وَجْهُ اللَّهِ. Wherever you turn yourselves to face, You turn towards Allah no matter where you are. And now Hajjaj is getting angrier and he says, put his face on the ground. They put his face on the ground, and then as his face is planted in the ground, he begins to recite another ayah of the Quran. He recites, Minha khalaqnakum wa fiha nu'idukum wa minha nukhrijukum taratan ukhra. From the earth we created you, and into it we will return you, and from it we will extract you another time. Hajjaj told them, slaughter him. And before they were able to put the blade to Saeed ibn Jubayr, he said to Hajjaj ibn Yusuf, I make you bear witness, Ya Hajjaj, that La ilaha illallah wahdahu la sharika la wa anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluh. That I bear witness that there is no God but Allah, who is alone and without partner, and that Muhammad is his final servant and messenger. I keep these words with you in safekeeping, Ya Hajjaj, until we meet again on the day of judgment. And then he makes a dua. He makes a dua. Saeed ibn Jubayr says, Ya Allah, O Allah, do not give him the power to kill anyone else after me. Let no one else be a victim to Hajjaj after me. And then they killed Saeed ibn Jubayr, rahimahullah ta'ala. Now after he was killed, Hajjaj ibn Yusuf lived for a very short time. In what remained of his days, he would constantly cry out in pain, what is it between me and Saeed ibn Jubayr? Because whenever I want to sleep, he takes me by the leg to prevent me from sleeping. He keeps having nightmares where Saeed ibn Jubayr is appearing in his dreams. In one narration, it says that he's telling his henchmen of nightmares, seeing Saeed ibn Jubayr appear before him in his dream, saying, Ya adu Allah, O enemy of Allah, limada qataltani, why did you kill me? And Hajjaj would say, what is it between me and Saeed ibn Jubayr? And it is said that 40 days after he killed Saeed ibn Jubayr, rahimahullah, Hajjaj passed away. And true to the dua that Saeed ibn Jubayr made, no one else was killed after he was killed, rahimahullah ta'ala. At-tarajum sayfun min suyufillahi azza wa jal. The biographies, as Imam Abu Hanifa said, are a sword from the swords of God. There are many lessons, dear brothers and sisters, that we can derive from this story. And there are many things that are relevant to us, even if we're never put in this position that Saeed ibn Jubayr was put into. Among the lessons, the greater lessons that we can derive from this story, number one, we see that tyrants, no matter where they are in history, they think that changing names changes reality. He called Saeed ibn Jubayr Shaqi ibn Qusayr. Is that true? Just by calling him a different name, does that really make Saeed wretched? That is the reality of tyrants, no matter where they are in the world. They change names and think that changes reality. We call this something else, thinking that people will believe the propaganda. It's not true. We also learn from this story the importance of fortifying our iman, so that our response to tyranny in hard times is one of salama, of being calm and collected with certainty in the promise of Allah. We also learn from this story the importance of the ayah, idfa' billati hiya ahsan. Respond in a way that is better. This story reminds us of the higher realities of Allah's power and knowledge, and that the response to wrongdoing is not cursing. The response to wrongdoing is not responding to wrongdoing with more wrongdoing, or responding to falsehood with falsehood, but it is responding with haqq, responding with truth, and reminding people of Allah and the ultimate day of requital. And we learn from this story, dear brothers and sisters, that we should never fall for the trap of loaded questions. People of falsehood often ask others loaded questions. Were you to give the correct answer, it would still be a loaded question. You have to question the presuppositions behind the questions of others who wish to cover up tyranny and make it seem like it is truth. We should never give tyrants the joy of eliciting a response. we should respond with truth in a way that shuts them down. And in this story, we see that Hajjaj is asking trick questions, and Saeed ibn Jubayr is constantly reminding him of the ultimate realities connected to the Day of Judgment. And the most important lesson, in my opinion, from this story that we can take right here and right now, from the story of Saeed ibn Jubayr, is that we should be mindful to take reminders of the hereafter from everyday things. You see how Saeed ibn Jubayr is making these immediate connections between the different questions he's given and the different circumstances he's put in. When they turn him away from the Qibla, he is reminded of the verse where Allah says, wherever you turn, you face Allah. When he's put on the ground, he's reminded of the fact that we all originate from the earth. When he sees the lute and the flute, and he hears the flute, he's reminded of the blowing of the horn on the Day of Judgment. Imam al-Ghazali mentions this, that when you see a carpenter, an expert in carpentry, they will pick up on the way houses are built because that's their field. If you're an interior designer, you're going to notice the interior design in people's homes. If you're a plumber, you're going to notice the plumbing in people's homes, things that others will not notice because that is your career path. And so you are intimately aware of those finer things. So if you are a mu'min, a believer, who is reminded of Jannah and Jahannam and Yawmul Qiyamah because you engage with the Quran, when you see and hear things around you, they are reminding you of those ultimate realities. So this is an ideal to aspire towards. And lastly, dear brothers and sisters, we learn the importance of giving a shahada lillah, a testimony of truth for the sake of Allah. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam said, "Afdalu jihad kalimatu haqqin 'inda sultanin ja'ir." The most virtuous struggle is saying a word of truth in the presence of an oppressive tyrant. This is the most superior act of struggle. Look at Saeed ibn Jubayr's certainty. Look at his coolness under pressure. Look at how he sought the pleasure of Allah over everything else. Look at how careful he was with his words. He could have said certain things more explicitly, but he said the truth in a way that he hoped would have an impact on those seeking truth. Dear brothers and sisters, the great lesson from history is that artificial piety coupled with oppression and tyranny is oftentimes worse than the external tyranny, because fake piety combined with oppression makes the religion a plaything in the hands of tyrants. And that is what Saeed ibn Jubayr rejected. And in this age of tyranny and darkness, we have no better response than what was taught to us in the book of Allah and in the way of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. And in this story of Saeed ibn Jubayr, we see those realities lived in an embodied response. These are our examples as Muslims, to center everything on Allah Ta'ala, to center everything on the hereafter, and knowing the reality that Allah may give tyrants reprieve, He may give them time, but Allah does not forget, Allah does not neglect. Their day of justice always comes. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala inspire us with these lessons and make us of those who give our testimony lillah, for Allah, and to derive reminders of the hereafter from everything around us, and inspire us with these teachings and lessons from this great tabi'i, Saeed ibn Jubayr rahimahullah ta'ala. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد عبدك ورسولك النبي الأمي وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا بقدر عظمة ذاتك في كل وقت وحين. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين. وقوموا إلى صلاتكم يرحمكم الله.